Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Iris Mackler in Jerusalem. At a time of great turmoil in the Middle East, with Islamist militias riding across Iraq and Syria, we're joined by Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for making time for us in your office.
Thank you.
Let me take you straight to Iraq, because I think everyone was shocked at the sight of these Sunni extremist militias making their way across Iraq, joining up to their other forces in Syria. Are they changing the map of the Middle East?
Of course. I mean, Sykes-Picot, the agreement that shaped the borders almost 100 years ago, has collapsed. Right now, the borders are redrawn. Unfortunately, there are militant Islamists of both sides, Shiites and Sunnis, fighting each other. I think there is a danger that those militancies will spill over in our direction. We'll take whatever precautions we need to do.
I was going to ask you, are there implications for Israel?
Of course. Already we have these militancies and their terror offsprings hitting at our doorstep. We see that in the Golan, we see that in Lebanon, we see it in Gaza, and we just saw it in the kidnappings by Hamas in the West Bank. So it's attacking us from every side. We push back. It's important, I think, for the entire world to push back. And I don't think we can resolve the battle between militant Shiites and Sunnis anytime soon. It's been there for centuries. But I think we can prevent them either from conquering new ground, and secondly, and most importantly, we must prevent them from having the weapons of mass destruction. Either side should not have either chemical weapons, and that's been done successfully in Syria, or nuclear weapons. And this is, I think, the greatest task of all, to make sure that the militant Shiites led by Iran did not get atomic powers. I think that is the ultimate question that we have to address in order to prevent an age of ultimate terror.
Okay, let me ask you that then. At this moment, perhaps we are seeing a strange bedfellows situation where Tehran, Damascus and Washington, for the moment, could be allied against these ISIS militias. Who's more dangerous in your view?
Look, I think that the militant Shiite camp led by Iran is an enemy of the United States, and the militant Sunnis led by Al-Qaeda and ISIS are enemies of the United States and of Europe and of France and of Israel. So, you know, when your enemies are fighting one another, my usual precept is don't strengthen either one of them, weaken both. But that's something that has to be contemplated in Washington and elsewhere. The most important thing, however, and there can be no doubt, is you don't want either one of them to have nuclear weapons, because then the world changes forever. And I think that this is the real danger that we have right now, is that Iran, in the shadow of what is happening now in Iraq, would somehow be rewarded with a deal that gives us the capability to make nuclear weapons in a few weeks or a few months. That would be a disaster for the West and for the world.
But you can see a situation...
And for the Arabs.
You can see a situation where there are short-term interests everyone having in common for the moment, which is the defeat of these radical Sunni militias who are coming across Iraq and joining up with Syria.
Well, you want to make sure that the ISIS does not take over Iraq, and you want to equally make sure that Iran doesn't take over Iraq as it did in Syria and Lebanon. And it's possible to fashion strategies how to do that without giving the key to Iran. That doesn't make sense. But as I said, I think the larger question, and I raise it because it is being discussed now as we speak in the coming days, is not to step over a historical boundary line without even noticing it, without having, because of the tactical needs of the moment in Iraq, to give Iran the world-changing, history-changing powers to have atomic bombs in the hands of the Ayatollahs. That is a terrible mistake, a cataclysmic mistake. That should be avoided at all costs.
Let me ask you about Jordan, your neighbour that sits between you and Iraq. There are media reports, US media reports this weekend, suggesting that the Hashemite king is very nervous and that he might turn to Israel for assistance if there was an ISIS attack coming in. Would Israel help?
I think the entire international community has to support Jordan because it's a stable, moderate Arab country at peace with Israel and at peace with the rest of the world. But I think that the Jordanian army is strong, and I think Jordan is stronger than people give it credit for. And I think, I expect that they'll be able to defend themselves.
But if they can't, if they ask your help?
I think, as I said, we should all do what we can to strengthen Jordan, and we have security cooperation with Jordan, as it does with many countries, and I think it's our common interest to make sure that a moderate, stable regime like that is able to defend itself. I think it can. But I think it won't be able to if the whole region is swayed, not so much by ISIS. I think ISIS can be, you can deal with that. But with Iranian-backed forces, backed by Iran with a nuclear umbrella, that will tip the balance. And I'm sorry I keep coming back to that. Well, I'm not sorry I'm coming back to that, because that is the issue.
You said that ISIS could be dealt with relatively easily. What were you thinking?
Well, I'm just saying that ISIS it doesn't have weapons. It has mortars, machine guns, even other weapons. But
that it just captured from the Iraqi army.
Yeah, okay, but they can kill dozens at a time, hundreds at a time. If they had chemical weapons, they could kill thousands at a time. But if you have any one of these sides, in this case Iran and its allies, with nuclear weapons, they could kill millions at a time. And we have to keep that in mind. We cannot resolve all the issues of the Middle East. It's an unstable area. It's been corked, you know, for about 100 years by an agreement, and first by colonial rule and then by dictatorial secular regimes. Okay, once those have been removed in the Arab Springs, all these ancient hatreds are coming out. Sunni against Shiite, tribe against tribe, movement against movement, sect against sect. We cannot control that. What we have to make sure is that none of these warring sides have the weapons to kill millions. That would be a tragedy, and that's what I'm focusing on. Having a good deal and not a bad deal. A good deal means dismantle Iran's nuclear capabilities and remove it from Iran, as was done in the case of Syria, as was not done in the case of North Korea. In North Korea, in fact, they did exactly what is being proposed. They kept the capability and they relied on inspections. Little did that help. North Korea now has several nuclear bombs. That shouldn't be repeated with Iran.
Let me take you to something that is more within Israel's control, and that is Israel's relationship with the Palestinians. Martin Indyk, the former envoy to the Middle East, has just resigned this weekend. Perhaps the Americans are packing up their bat and ball and going home. Is there something that Israel perhaps should be doing now, as some of your coalition partners are calling for?
Well, I think that we all want to see the peace process resumed. I think that will only be possible when President Abbas breaks his pact with Hamas. Hamas is a terror organization, designated as such by the United States and Europe, has kidnapped our teenagers, 3 Israeli teenagers, calls for Israel's destruction. So, and I'm glad President Abbas, in fact, condemned the kidnapping. That was important. So now he has to choose, you know, either a pact with Hamas or peace with Israel. I hope he dissolves his pact with Hamas and comes back to the negotiating table.
But the peace
we'll be there.
The peace talks failed before the pact with Hamas.
Well, they failed because I think that President Abbas was not eager to talk about the compromises that the Palestinian side would have to make in these talks. Everybody talks about the Israeli compromises, but no Israeli government is going to hand over territory to the Palestinians without knowing what is on the other side of the territory. Do you make a state that continues the unending war with Israel? Do you ask to flood Israel with the descendants of Palestinian refugees? Do you say that the Jewish state has no right? The Jewish people have no right of self-determination?
But all of these are questions for a negotiation.
Exactly, exactly. And we were prepared and are prepared to resume such negotiations, and I think they'll have to be engaged. And I think President Abbas, rather than embracing Hamas that wants no negotiations, openly calls for our extermination, has to choose. And I hope he makes the right choice. You have to ask yourself, how can he make a pact with Hamas and talk about peace with Israel? I asked him that question, and I encourage him to make the right decision, as I think anybody who wants peace should. The issues between Israel and the Palestinians are complex, but I don't think they're that complex. I think they're fairly simple.
So why haven't you resolved it?
Because the Palestinian side has to overcome the core issue of the conflict, Are you willing to recognize the right of the Jewish people to have a state of their own in any boundary? Because that's the issue. It's not settlements, that can be resolved. It's not borders, that can be resolved. We want to know one thing. We're willing to have, I'm willing to have a genuine peace with the Palestinians. You have your state, and we have our state. And we have no demands on one another. Don't keep the dream of destroying Israel alive, because you have to educate your people that it's over. No more war, no more bloodshed, peace. Educate your children and your people for peace. And come out and say that. I am willing to recognize the Jewish state. I have said before my constituencies, I'm willing to have a Palestinian state, a demilitarized Palestinian state.
Perhaps not your settler partners.
Well, I ask that now of the Palestinian leadership, as I ask it of myself. Peace begins with the leaders. It has to go through the peoples, and we have to educate our peoples for peace. But in Israel, everybody wants peace. Some have despaired of the peace because they've seen the territory that we've handed over to the Palestinians, as in Gaza, was not used for peace. It was used to launch rockets, thousands of rockets on our heads. And that's why we ask the Palestinians to give us a commitment, not as a price of entering the negotiations, but of completing them. Give us a commitment that you will recognize the state of Israel as the state of the Jewish people once and for all, and have a genuine peace. I'm willing to do that kind of a deal with the Palestinians. I hope that President Abbas will be willing to make that kind of a deal with me. And we'll give a different future for our children, our grandchildren. It's a different thing.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching France 24. Stay tuned, and stay tuned to France24.com.